Okay, coming to the last part of our syllabus was actually discussion on the factors that probably influence vulnerability and in particular the development work which leads to the vulnerability. Uh, so I thought I discuss this mostly uh, in relation to the disaster that someone can quantify or notice with the use of modern day technology. So this was one of the examples we had a discussion in last class regarding drought situation that is present in Chennai. So nowadays you can monitor drought. Okay. Nowadays you can monitor the drought and at the same time you can quantify the water level in terms of volume that is depleting from certain period of time. So the thing you can see on the left hand side is 2018 June 15 when the lake in Tamil Nadu in Chennai, Sugal Lake, which is one of the major sources of the water for the city of Chennai, it is filled with water. And just immediately 1 year after, uh, the lake has no water. So, in terms of the loss of the water, in terms of the stress due to the drought, these things can be calculated simply by looking at the energy structure of satellite. Okay. So we have a range of applications uh, of the satellite images, uh, particularly in case of development work that can be used as a part of uh, civil engineering. And also there are some specific examples for civil engineering applications there. So here you see that there is a watershed which is coming or which is being regulated for uh, step of rivers and tributaries. So what is a watershed? So watershed analysis is a major part of civil engineering. Uh, or watershed or basin is the area that is confined within the boundary. So if there is any amount of rainfall that happens within this boundary, then ultimately, depending on the soil conditions in the master some part of the water may be contributing to the outlet in one of these rivers. So if you see this is a water state boundary for a particular river, then if there is a rainfall that is happening within this boundary inside the red area, then ultimately that rain may be contributing some amount of rainfall which can be measured in the river. So any amount of rainfall that will fall outside the boundary will not be contributing to that runoff within this watershed. So how you are going to delineate the watershed? So how you are going to calculate these boundaries? So these are also can be done with the help of satellite images, with the help of digital elevation models nowadays. The digital elevation model capture the undulations of the earth. So if the undulations of the earth, then you can find out see this kind of watershed boundary, which is very high to from the civil engineering purpose. And at the same time, it would be needed to construction of any dam or river putting the section in the river. Okay? So with the last slide, I would like to show two disaster situations. One is the pre and the post disaster. So this is a landslide that has happened. So in some area in Iraq. So this is captured by one tiny satellite, which is known as DF2, and then the date of operation is 11. So here you see on the top of the screen, there is a linear ligament feature that is going along uh, the southeast part of the image. to the northwest part. So this is actually a road. And then on the either side of the road, there is a slope, which is small, landslide. So this is on the base, this is on 2015, sometime in 19, I guess maybe I don't know, but there is a disaster in the landslide that has occurred. Now this is captured by the satellite image. And in that case, you can monitor the amount of road that is being damaged and how much of the time that may require in order to clear the road so that normal traffic flow is stored. And at the same time, maybe the volume of civil construction work that is required in such a case. So these are applications, particularly in civil engineering, which is based on the quantification that happen. Okay? There are sometimes earthquake building damages. So here we see a building damage which is prior to an earthquake during normal situation. So this is happening in another part of Iran in January 2016. So Iran is also suspected or vulnerable to earthquakes like our Gujarat or northeast part of the country. So many of the artists have done a lot of damages in part of Iran. So have you heard about the can you out to get a occurred in Iran, the news of the change with the news in Iran? Okay? Like in Gujarat, we had the Bhuj earthquake, or some earthquake did, or some earthquake in 1950 or 1967. Okay? There is a province called Bam. So try to find the additional information. Okay? When did the earthquake came there? So here you see during the earthquake, the buildings sometimes they are partially damaged, or buildings they completely damaged, which are rendered mm, uh, to the dust. And sometimes the buildings see some pancake type of damage. During the pancake type of damage, the main structural hello, during the pancake type of damage, uh, the main components such as the columns and the beams which sustain significant damage, but they do not form off. Uh, that is quite noticeable from the psychology difficult to be identified. So what we can do when we supply these, we can categorize different types of damages that occur after an earthquake, whether there is a complete damage, whether it is a partial collapse, or whether it is a defensive type of damage. And in the satellite image below the sea, here on the red areas there are identified damages in Iran in the particular area. And then these are again subcategorized into different degrees of damages in terms of the intensity mapping exercise. Okay? So here we can create a building stock assessment. This is also be one of the hazard mapping exercises. Then if you have identified buildings which sustain different categories of damage, then you can properly go for planning routes for search and rescue. Okay? Then damage assessment is outpatient planning, deformation mapping is another sector, which uses star interferometry, satellite images, as I have shown here, in Indonesia, how much of the land subsidence may be happening because of the earthquake, and so forth. Okay. And basically, these are used to post disaster phase, in particular response as well as travel. stages. Okay. Uh, okay, so this one I'll skip. Uh, so, okay, for this particular slide, I would continue the story of the development work, which actually contributes to the vulnerability or increase in the population. So, can you see the slide here right now?
So,
Sure. Okay, let me share another slide here. Can you see the model 5 here? This, do you see it?
module 12.
Okay. So model 5, we are mostly concerned with the disaster, environment, and development. Okay, so this is the last module of the syllabus, and you will find the main things which are actually the closing part for the entire discussion throughout this semester. So there is actually not much, very much new thing to be taught in these materials, that there should be some kind of a discussion that involves your understanding of the subject, mm, especially, especially the disease, how the damage may happen because of some of the work that we do in the name of uh, infrastructure development or some sort of forest generation work or any sort of transportation work. And so this again is not a very one-sided uh, inclusive thing, but rather this whole discussion is standing on some sort of argument. Tools and knowledge you have gained throughout your classes here, you may put forward your own argument, which then will be debated. Okay? So the point is that we have to draw some line between development and sustainable way how we use the resources that are available to us. And it is becoming more and more an important issue since population of the globe is increasing. I would say it is not increasing, it's exploding. So if you look at the population that was there in the 1800s and compare the population right now in the globe, it's actually going more like in the 26 So if this trend continues, then you can imagine the threat that will be there on the resources which might be available in the future generations, or even the resources are now depleting. So mankind has to find a way to judiciously use the resources available and at the same time try to balance the, uh, the development work. So development is not only simply construction of civil structures or mechanizing things or just automation of the manufacturing processes, but ultimately there should be the greater aim of all this development work. So the greater aim should be uh, to make uh, sustainable and then uh, to make life easier in a way that you can sustain it as far as possible. It should not be uh, depleting or it should not be a factor of depleting the resources which is available to us because we do not have another planet to go. Okay? Whatever you do, you have to do in this planet. So there are critics who would argue that yes, we as a country which are still at the phase of development, then we should focus our attention more into some sort of infrastructural development and then industrialization and then mechanizing of things in agriculture, in farming, or just important genetic food, genetically modified food. so that the efficiency of production goes up. But at the same time, there were other critics who say that no, we should rather respect our ways, how we have been consuming, particularly the energy which is available in fossil or which are the uh, deplete resources of energy which are not really renewable. And then think again how we can further change our habits, right? Exchange. So there has always been an idea between the development and then sustainability. Then together with the development, not only many sectors of the society reap the benefit, but there are at the same time you create a part of the society who or who you push towards the age of vulnerability. So there may be plenty of case studies for both the arguments. And then we now just focus on inside of the story right now that how does not simply work to basis vulnerability and to the particular system. Right? Sometimes this vulnerability uh, is not they do not follow certain sort of a predefined rules, but they depend on many factors and these factors are intrinsically linked with other in determining the final outcome. Okay, so it's very different from society to society. It may be different from the previous different vulnerability itself. And then it may be also dependent on the level of poverty, social belief, so on and so forth. So, in particular, uh, if we are talking about urban development, uh, so what may be the additional things that we notice together for city expanding. So, what are the byproducts of the city that we see? We do not see only big buildings, but we see the humane part of the city function. So there may be some section of the society who is engaged in some work. So if you look at the particular example of Dubai, in the 1980s, Dubai was like any other part in the Middle East. We didn't have, Dubai didn't have a lot of the skyscrapers, often exist like it now. And then within this matter of 3, 4 decades, city has seen a few change in the skyline. So lot and lot of new buildings. Not only buildings, we were super structures, incredible, unimaginable structures within a period of 3, 4 decades have been erected in the middle of the desert. So who is actually constructing this skyscraper? So there are no doubt definitely the mechanical part is involved, but together with the machinery part, there are people who are who are uh, coming from various corners of the country in order to work in this construction sector in Dubai. So if you look at the condition of these people, uh, then the study should be looking for an angle that whether we are increasing their vulnerability in some sort or we are really lessening their vulnerability from a data point of view of how the society is behaving. So the study shows that this is just a physical example of the problem. In general, maybe so that there may be somewhere which are going on, and obviously there is an influx related to low income groups. So if you look at the why most of the people who are going to the taking the manual labor, then the machinery operators, those people can right? Ours, in South Asian countries, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and from far east countries such as Philippines and Indonesia. So when they go uh, with the large scale settlements in marginal lands, islands with affordable house, they face the problem of quality of housing. Uh, so look at I think from their perspective, they are no doubt instrumental in directing the relief where they settle themselves. Because whenever they're developing the property, the price of the property goes up, and then for poorer sections of the society, it is you raise the gap between the rich and the poor. So earlier, if the land is having price which was affordable to marginalized society, so once you're in the development work that you have invested in the society, in the particular piece of land, then ultimately this is beyond the reach of those marginalized institutions. They will not be able to buy any property that are constructed when price is picking up, even though they are the ones who are directing those properties. So they have to leave in the city where obviously the quality or the, from the size is less, and then most often these are areas which are squatters, areas or something like that. And these are areas which are highly spent, high density areas. And then you can imagine in high density areas that is the problem that people will facing. The quality of housing will be poor because we expect uh, too densely. There will be the density of the population too high compared to the other parts of the city. And then from the point of view of safeguarding this housing, it will obviously not be following in the terms of the code. And then there will be the problem, especially in the normal point of time or even the disaster. So supposedly someone is living in quarters, so it should be area where you have not the proper drainage because there is not proper drainage. There will be a lot of intensification of diseases, so there will be problems related to waterborne diseases. There will be problems related with mosquito-borne diseases, malaria, and so forth. And nowadays, even time of we're talking about social distancing, it is quite impossible for those people to maintain this kind of issues. And then they will be obviously the choice of their housing will not be in the zones which are designated by the regulations. So they will prefer to push themselves into the areas which are often red flagged as areas where you cannot really go and then build your housing or houses. So because of that, they push themselves to the farther boundary of vulnerability. And then, from the point of view of disasters, they often are the first uh, bearers, or I would say the first wows of getting hit from either floods or landslides, or you'd say any urban disaster, maybe fire, so on and so forth. So this is particularly in case of urban development. So any development that may happen either in the marine areas or coastal development areas, particularly for attracting tourists, also changes the lifestyles of the population who had been living in those areas prior to the arrival of the tourists. So just imagine suddenly if your area or your hometown became a tourist hotspot, and then people on an average of around 3,000 to suppose 10,000 people started coming and visiting your hometown on a regular basis. So don't you think that there may be some section of the population who would be pushed to the edge of vulnerability? No doubt there will be someone or greater section of the property society who would be benefiting uh, because of the sudden change due to tourism. But again, the lifestyle will be changing, the habits will change, the way how the society was interacting with one another will change, and then this will lead further to some sort of vulnerability to some marginalized section of the society. So, in terms of giving you an example, uh, there are examples not only in Asian countries but even in Europe, where suddenly a place has become an attract for tourism, and then ultimately people has to stop the influx of tourists into that space if at all it is happening quite uh, within a short span of time. So if it is initiated from the country itself of origin that you want to promote tourism, and then you will construct in some developmental and coastal areas for tourist attraction, then obviously also some populations will be pushed to the edges where they have to go and then settle themselves, which are vulnerable to storm surge or high winds, flash floods, and landslides. It's just a matter of finding the right example from uh, from this point. So again, there are arguments. You will say that Assam, from the point of view of striking a balance between development works and safety, it has been in the news for a lot of other reasons. So we need energy nowadays because in order to feed the population, in order to meet the demand of the energy, we are looking into the conventional types of energies and also to some alternate sources. So since we have the resources, one group will say that why don't we exploit the resources? We have rivers which are filled with water. Like we have rivers which are almost perennial, rivers of water which do not dry up. And then at the same time, we do not have enough energy. So there are proposal of construction of dams. Even during the time when in the upstream of the basin of Brahmaputra, it falls in a different country, and the other country is engaged itself in the construction of big dams. We are still debating whether big dams should be constructed in our part of the country or not. So there are arguments which say that if we construct big dams, then there is definitely some benefits that we are going to reap, but there may be additional burdens which at this point of time we are not being able to accept. So what may be these additional burdens? So these additional burdens may come in the form of change of the ecosystem, or there may be significant change in the social lifestyle of the people. A certain section of the people may uh, become rich very quickly, and then at the same time, certain people just will be pushed back to the age of poverty. And apart from that, there are environmental concerns, as I said, that if there is an influx of water levels quite significantly within the day downstream of the reservoir, that may endanger the existence of many of the bird species or even fishes, or even there may be change in the soil structure, which will ultimately render the soil not very fertile and useless for cultivation. Besides, there always remains the risk of the dam being toppled or dam getting destroyed, since we are in a very vulnerable earthquake zone. So these kind of arguments, uh, I would not suggest what is good or what is bad, what the country should be doing or what the country should not be doing. This is from your point of view to judge. But my thing here is to open up the possible areas where there may be scopes of debate, uh, which you have not maybe earlier thought, and then just have started thinking right now. So, in your terms, how best can we be striking this balance between development and then the risk of a disaster
and then not highlighting or heightening the vulnerability of a particular section of the society. Okay, so these are said the water resource management process. These include dams and irrigation schemes, and then they may potentially increase the risk to a larger population. So if I am just opening up the television nowadays, even now in Lakhimpur district, the floods caused by uh, the release of water by the Ranganadi uh, in the Ranganadi river uh, from the dam is actually causing a lot of attention. So people are suffering unexpected floods at the at the time of the year where there were no floods earlier. So if you're expecting floods, then you can prepare yourself. But if you're exposed to floods suddenly and then without a warning, that means again your vulnerability increases many folds due to this unpredictability of the nature of the floods. So similar examples may be thought in terms of the construction or a poorly managed forest program. So we have a national highway, highway number 37, which actually goes through one of the sanctuaries, which is very important from the point of view of diversity of the uh, biodiversity or point of view of the animal corridors, as people say. So the argument is that whether we are crossing their territories or the animals are crossing ours. So if we consider that to be a part of a sanctuary, I'm talking about the Kaziranga National Forest, then it is on our part a mistake that we have constructed a highway through the National Reserve Forest. So once you construct this highway through the National Forest or sanctuary, then you drastically change the habits of the animals which are living there. So you never know their psychology. There may be heightened tensions among their animals, and then because the highway has been created, they cannot come crossing the highway to the other side, even if they want at some point of time. So their national territory is being hampered, and then that leads to an increased level of tension among themselves, and then they are showing, or in them it has been manifested in some other ways, where they are going here and there and destroying the properties and then the houses somewhere nearby areas. So before nowadays, it is very important that you undertake a developmental work. There should be adequate certification from the authorities in terms of environmental impact and also the social impact. So both these two things has to be passed and scrutinized, and then only you can undertake some sort of developmental work. So what is an environmental impact? So the environmental impact is the one that I have just mentioned uh, before. Suppose I would now engage myself in constructing a highway or a road through the national sanctuary. There are the questions, and then I'll have to meet those questions from the point of view of environmental uh, sustainability, and so that you do not hamper the existing environment, existing wildlife there. So in that case, what is the social impact then? Okay, so social impact is also somehow quite similar with the environmental impact. So imagine I give you an example. Suppose there was a village, okay? So there was a village earlier, and then suddenly the government has taken a decision that through the village they are going to construct a railway line. So once they started construction of a railway line, they cannot really construct it. They have to do what? They have to increase the elevation, okay, to where the rail tracks will be laid. So once you increase the elevation, it will become like an embankment. So once you create such an embankment, then the free flowing of water may hamper. That is one issue. That is the environmental issue. But from the point of the society, what this newly constructed railway line may translate into the impact on the existing society or the community there. So one of the examples may be earlier when there were no railway lines, there may be social interactions which were happening on either side of the railway lines. So there were villages, and then those villages, people were free to just move to one another in a free manner, free and then, how to say, without any second thoughts. They could come from this village to the other. And then there may be some social interactions also taking place between these villages. Social interactions, I mean like marriages happening from one village across that other village. But when you construct the line, there may be a hampering of these interactions of one village with the other, and then that this may significantly alter their way of life. So there may be a reduced interaction between these two villages. This actually happens in reality also, and then they may translate into some sort of form of heightened vulnerability. I cannot say what may happen, what may not happen, but there are possibilities that this vulnerability may rise. There may be social tensions which may arise. People may try to see the villages in terms of segregations simply by the railway line. So these are some of the social impacts which also have to be taken into account before development work can or is allowed to go nowadays. So this is becoming very, very important. So as I said, that disaster management has to encompass all these aspects, and then it has been nowadays becoming a multidisciplinary subject. So you have people or subject experts coming from civil engineering and also from social science, from medicine, uh, from even economics, and then many other sections of the society, whatever you can think of. Okay, so in the in the module itself, uh, the further towards the discussion will be taken care of by some of the case studies actually in support of this theory that development can heighten vulnerability. So before that, I would argue uh, from your side also, try to invest some time and then go search in the net and then see such case studies. So there are plenty of such case studies, either from India or there may be case studies even across all over the globe, where people have seen there are vulnerabilities, the dynamics of vulnerability has significantly been altered because of undertaking of some sort of developmental work. Okay, so there was one case study I happened to hear is the change of the cultivation or the way how people used to cultivate earlier, and then once you suddenly introduce some sort of mechanized form of cultivation into the society. So your idea is good. In order to meet the demand, or in order to meet the increasing demand of the population, we somewhere has to intervene, and then this intervention has to be some sort of uh, mechanical intervention or engineering intervention, so that you increase the productivity, you increase the efficiency of the system. So imagine a village where people used to cultivate earlier using only plows or using some sort of hand devices. But suddenly, if you give all those villagers one power tiller or one tractor each, well, then your greater objective of increasing the efficiency of the system or the community may translate with an additional burden of increasing their vulnerability. But how this vulnerability is going to get increased, that is the point of discussion now. Okay, and Yes, there are plenty of examples as you can thought right now, or even I urge you to go and then search Google, and then maybe in the next class we will open up one such case studies from you, which I will further elaborate in the form of discussion that all on everybody in the class takes place. Okay. And again, you see the livestock development projects. These are also some of the areas where uh, the vulnerability actually increases. So, what are the livestock development projects? So, livestock development projects may be sometimes you increase the productivity of milk. You want to increase the meat production, and then suddenly you give a lot of such animals to a village which didn't have these animals earlier. So, with the increase of these animals, there is an increased burden or pressure on the uh, mm, existing food for the animals. And then, if you do not have proper supply of food, then you allow these animals to be rendering in the forest for food, then ultimately they would be one of the important factors of the loss of vegetation. So one particular vegetation may be depleting because the animals will be eating it up. And then if this thing happens, then ultimately there will be a condition which will lead to desertification of the area. It will also lead to an increase in soil erosion from the basin because there will be no soil cover or forest cover, particularly from those grasses or shrubs which the animals are actually consuming. So that may increase the vulnerability in some form or the other. If there is an increasing desertification, there will be a loss of available water consequently, and which there are other problems such as soil erosion, loss of productivity, and if it is a hilly area, then probably you will see increasing number of landslides which may happen. So before we initiate these developmental projects in a blind fashion, the urgency is that we have to look into all the pros and cons of implementation of these projects. So, uh, two way of doing is ensuring it meets the proper requirement of the environmental impact, and at the same time nowadays the social impact is becoming equally important. Another example may be agricultural projects promoting cash crops. So, what are the cash crops? Cash crops may be, what are the cash crops? So cash crops may be your cotton, may be one of the cash crops. Okay. So if somehow you have discovered that your land is good for growing some sort of cash crops. So remember during the time when Britishers were there, they asked the Indian people to stop going for production of wheat. Instead, they were encouraging Indian people to produce what? Did you know that? What is the blue liquid that we use uh, when you wash your clothes? Uh, so this historical facts you should be knowing. Okay. So if you promote production of cash crops onto a particular community, then they may stop actually the production of the staple foods which they have been doing for generations in order to get quick and more money. So that may ultimately result in some form of vulnerability in their entire cycle. So by the next class, I hope you should study some of the case studies in relation to development and then increasing or heightened vulnerability from some part in the country, and then be able to at least present the gist of the story uh, and then open up it for discussion. Okay, so anyway, there is some section where I should be arranging for some group discussion. So let it be the topic. So any questions? Or you have already left, everybody? 47 students. And then when I see the what's that? Attendance, I see almost 80, double. So now 47 students, the same. And when I take the attendance, there will be suddenly a jump of around 80, 90. Uh, you, anyway, attending is important, but I really do not go into this investigation. I never will. But it is up to you whether you find this important, then you should be coming to the classes. Okay? And not like that.